In the shadows of the Iron Curtain, where art bent under the weight of censorship, filmmakers dared to dream of galaxies beyond control. What happens when science fiction is forged under totalitarian watch? These aren't Hollywood blockbusters. These are the hidden treasures of Czechoslovakia and Poland films, filled with paranoia, wonder, and rebellion disguised as fantasy. Some vanished, some resurfaced. Tonight, we unearth 12 Cold War sci-fi gems you've never forgotten because you were never allowed to see them. Ikarie XB-1, 1963. Upon release, Ikarie XB-1 was hailed in Prague as a dazzling step forward, a film that could rival anything from the West. Directed by Jindřich Polák, it presented the crew of the starship Ikarie voyaging through deep space in search of new life. Its sleek design, philosophical dialogue, and quiet despair anticipated 2001, a space odyssey by 5 years. Yet, beyond the screen, shadows loomed. The film's themes were too daring for its time. In the West, censors hacked away at its darker edges, retitling it Voyage to the End of the Universe and stripping it of its haunting ambiguity. In the East, officials questioned its melancholy tone, its suggestion that humanity's flaws would follow into the stars. Could it be read as criticism of the socialist utopia? Whispers suggested it was too Western in spirit, too pessimistic for the optimistic vision demanded by the regime. Behind the scenes, the crew worked under immense pressure. Studio executives worried whether the sets, modeled with cutting-edge design, appeared too decadent. Still, cinematographer Jan Kalisz created space vistas so bold that they directly inspired Stanley Kubrick's team when 2001 entered production. Rumors persisted that Kubrick's aides screened Ikarie repeatedly in London. In Czechoslovakia, audiences were stunned. The film's meditative pace divided viewers. Some found it hypnotic, others bewildering. In the United States, it was gutted, reduced to pulp, and buried in late-night TV slots. But for those who saw the original, it remained unforgettable. Today, Ikarie XB-1 is celebrated as one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made outside Hollywood. Restored prints, tour festivals, its haunting score echoing across decades. Once censored, once distorted, it now glimmers as proof that under oppression, imagination still found galaxies of freedom. The reflection lingers. Even in a system that demanded conformity, artists charted courses to the stars, and in doing so, exposed the limits of earthly control. Rękopis znaleziony w Saragossa. The Saragossa manuscript, 1965. At first glance, the Saragossa manuscript seems more surreal odyssey than science fiction. Yet Wojciech Has's 3-hour masterpiece belongs on this list, for in Cold War Poland, fantasy was rebellion, and nested tales became coded sci-fi allegories. Its wandering soldiers, shifting identities, and dreamlike landscapes were a metaphysical exploration of reality itself. The Polish audience, craving escape, flocked to it. Critics whispered it was dangerous. The story followed an 18th-century officer who stumbles upon an endless manuscript of stories within stories. Ghosts, conspiracies, secret societies, and time-bending illusions blur the line between what is real and imagined. To the authorities, this wasn't just art, it was subversion. Because under the surface, the film questioned absolute truth, the very foundation of the party's power. Censorship battles were constant. Officials demanded cuts, fearing its ambiguity would confuse the masses. But Has resisted, aided by allies within the Polish film establishment who argued it was folklore rather than sedition. On set, chaos reigned. Long shooting schedules, elaborate sets, and a script that shifted daily. The director clashed with state-appointed overseers, determined to preserve his vision. When released, audiences were divided. Some walked out, lost in its labyrinthine structure. Others whispered that it was the most daring film Poland had ever produced. Western critics barely noticed at first, until Jerry Garcia of The Grateful Dead and filmmaker Martin Scorsese rescued it decades later, financing a full restoration. Now, it survives as a cult treasure. To watch it is to enter a dream where history itself folds like paper. Once threatened with erasure, it has become eternal. The emotional echo is clear. In a world demanding simple answers, this film whispered that truth is layered, infinite, and never fully controlled. Zitra vestanu a opajim se chajem. Tomorrow I'll wake up and scald myself with tea. 1977. It began as a comedy, a light-hearted satire about time travel. Directed by Jindřich Polák, the same visionary behind Ikarie XB-1, this film hit its sharpest daggers beneath laughter. Its premise? Former Nazis, alive and scheming, plot to travel back in time with stolen technology to change the outcome of World War II. Only a bumbling everyman can stop them. Sounds harmless? Not in 1,970 seconds, Czechoslovakia. The authorities were uneasy. A comedy involving Nazis, and by extension, mocking the mythology of heroic socialist victory, was seen as walking a razor's edge. Worse, the villains weren't portrayed as monstrous but absurd, their ideology reduced to buffoonery. Some censors worried this made light of the party's sacred war legacy. Rumors swirled that party officials debated shelving the project altogether. Behind the scenes, the production endured endless scrutiny. Scripts were combed line by line, directors summoned to explain allegorical intent. Polak, ever sly, reassured them it was just a farce. But audiences knew better. They recognized the satire for what it was, not just about Nazis, but about any system clinging to power through fear. When it premiered, the laughter in theaters was explosive. For a moment, the public found release, mocking tyranny itself. Critics abroad were stunned. Here was a sci-fi, time-travel comedy from behind the Iron Curtain, years before Back to the Future. The legacy endures. Once dismissed as silly, the film has found new appreciation as one of the boldest satirical sci-fi films of the Cold War. It showed that even under censorship, humor could dismantle fear. Its reflective note, in a world where the past was constantly rewritten by those in power, this film dared to laugh at the very act of rewriting history itself. Test pilota, Pirx a pilot. Pirx's Test, 1979. When Poland adapted Stanisław Lem's work, the results were rarely ordinary. Pilot Pirx's Test, directed by Marek Piestrak, brought Lem's stories of cosmic doubt into vivid cinematic form. At its core, it was about a man confronted with the limits of humanity and the cold precision of machines. Pirx, an unassuming astronaut, is tasked with commanding a mission to Saturn. On board, crew members who might not be human at all. The film unfolded with quiet dread. Lem's writing had always been suspicious of utopias, and here the message was stark. Technology may advance, but human flaws endure. In Poland, audiences sensed something deeper, a story about trust, control, and hidden enemies, told in the guise of space adventure. But party officials were less enthusiastic. The ambiguity of who was real and who was programmed sparked whispered debates. Was this a metaphor for political conformity? Behind the camera, tensions simmered. State television backed the project but demanded accessibility. Lem himself, famously critical of adaptations, complained about simplifications. Actors struggled under heavy prosthetics, and the Saturn sequences nearly collapsed the budget. Yet, despite limitations, Piestrak achieved eerie visuals that lingered long after the credits rolled. Upon release, reception was divided. Some found it plodding compared to Western sci-fi. Others saw brilliance in its restraint, a slow-burn tale that mirrored Cold War paranoia. In the West, the film barely circulated, dismissed as too cerebral. But in Poland, it found a quiet following, screened in universities where students debated its meaning late into the night. Its legacy has grown. Today, Pilot Pirx's Test stands as one of the most faithful interpretations of Lem's skepticism about progress. It asked not whether machines would betray us, but whether we would betray ourselves. The emotional truth it leaves behind? Even in the cold vacuum of space, the most terrifying unknown was never the machine, it was us. Bariera. 1966. Jerzy Skolimowski's Bariera isn't conventional science fiction. Yet under Cold War scrutiny, its surreal allegory of a student adrift in a controlled society feels like speculative fiction of the most daring kind. The film follows a medical student who abandons his career, wandering through fragmented visions of Poland's modern life, glass walls, strange encounters, endless barriers, both physical and invisible. Audiences were puzzled. Was it fantasy, a dream, or a coded prophecy of a Poland where young people were trapped between duty and desire? Officials weren't sure either, and that uncertainty made them nervous. The surreal images seemed to undermine socialist realism, offering no positive hero, no triumph of ideology. Instead, it asked, what if the system itself is the barrier? Censorship was fierce. The film faced delays, with critics pressured to dismiss it as incomprehensible. Skolimowski himself clashed with cultural watchdogs, accused of smuggling Western absurdism into Polish cinema. His defense was that it was poetry, not politics. Yet, everyone sensed the metaphor. In an age where futures were dictated by party lines, Bariera dared to suggest that personal freedom might matter more than collective slogans. Production was fraught with risk. The director used fragmented editing and surreal set design, pushing the limits of what the studio system tolerated. Some crew members feared the project might be banned entirely, but somehow it slipped through, perhaps because its allegory was too elusive to pin down. When it premiered, audiences were divided. Some left confused, muttering that it was nonsense. Others whispered it was the boldest Polish film of its decade. Abroad, critics embraced it, calling Skolimowski a visionary heir to Fellini. Today, Bariera is recognized as a daring Cold War artifact sci-fi, not of rockets and robots, but of societies where invisible walls dictated every step. Its haunting conclusion reminds us, sometimes the most suffocating science fiction isn't set in space. It's set in your own city, when the walls are invisible, but unyielding. Na Srebrnym Globie, On the Silver Globe, 1977-1988. No film better symbolizes Cold War suppression than Andrzej Żuławski's On the Silver Globe. Conceived as Poland's great sci-fi epic, it was an adaptation of his great-uncle Jerzy Żuławski's lunar trilogy. With massive sets, elaborate costumes, and surreal landscapes, it was meant to rival Star Wars. Instead, it became a story of destruction and rebirth. The premise was breathtaking. Astronauts colonized the moon, creating a new society that spirals into tyranny and religious obsession. Generations later, an Earth envoy arrives, only to find himself worshipped, betrayed, and destroyed by the very descendants of the first settlers. It was a cosmic allegory for power, corruption, and the endless cycle of history. Too dangerous? The authorities thought so. Midway through production, the Polish Ministry of Culture abruptly shut the film down. Officials ordered sets destroyed, costumes burned, reels locked away. The reason? Waste of resources. But everyone knew it was censorship. Żuławski's allegory of oppressed societies and false saviors hit too close to home. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Actors fought to protect costumes from destruction. Crew members smuggled reels out under coats. Żuławski, devastated, fled Poland, swearing the film would never be completed. For years, the footage languished, a ghost project whispered about in hushed tones. Then, in the 1,980 seconds, when censorship loosened, Żuławski returned. He assembled fragments, adding narration over missing scenes. The result was incomplete but astonishing, a fever dream of cosmic landscapes and broken grandeur. Audiences gasped. Critics hailed it as both a masterpiece and a ruin. Today, On the Silver Globe is legendary. A film mutilated by politics, resurrected by defiance. Its very incompleteness is part of its power, its lasting reflection. Even when the censors burned the sets and silenced the voices, the dream of freedom outlived them, carved forever into lunar dust. Krakatit, 1948. Though released just after World War II, Karol Čapek's story, Krakatit, adapted for film by Otakar Vavra, cast a long shadow over Cold War Czechoslovakia. Based on Čapek's 1924 novel, it told the haunting tale of a brilliant scientist who discovers a new explosive so powerful it could obliterate entire cities. Sound familiar? It should. This was years before Hiroshima, yet it eerily foreshadowed the atomic age. The film follows engineer Prokop, racked by visions of destruction, as he tries desperately to control and ultimately resist the power of his invention. But the more he tries, the more others seek to exploit his discovery. Industrialists, generals, politicians all circle him like vultures. For audiences in 1948, the parallels to real-world events were chilling. But in the early days of the communist regime, the allegory became even sharper. Who truly owns science? The people, the state, or the profiteers? Officials approved the film because it carried a moral warning against capitalist greed. Yet beneath the surface, viewers sensed a deeper dread, that no ideology could be trusted with such destructive force. It was a cautionary tale about power itself, cloaked in the language of science fiction. Behind the scenes, production was plagued by shortages. Sets had to be built from recycled war debris. Costumes were improvised. Actors whispered that some sequences felt too real as the ruins of bombed-out Prague doubled for fictional destruction. Vavra himself admitted later that he had to balance his artistic intent with the growing political scrutiny of the late 40 seconds. When it premiered, reactions were divided. Intellectuals praised its visionary message. Party loyalists tried to frame it as an anti-Western warning. Ordinary viewers, still reeling from war, found it terrifying. In later years, it was quietly shelved, resurfacing only in the 1,960 seconds when nuclear dread returned in full force. Today, Krakatit is seen as one of the most prophetic works of Cold War cinema, a film that asked not just what science could create, but whether humanity was capable of surviving its own brilliance, its reflective truth. In every regime, the deadliest invention is not the bomb itself, but the belief that someone can control it. The War of the Worlds. Next Century, 1981. Piotr Zulkin's The War of the Worlds. Next Century took Wells's Alien Invasion as a starting point, but twisted it into something far darker, a satire of authoritarian control. Released in Poland in 1981 on the eve of martial law, the film follows Iron Item, a television presenter forced to deliver propaganda after Martians arrive and form an alliance with the state. The aliens themselves are secondary. The true menace is the regime that uses them to enforce obedience, silence dissent, and weaponize media. For Polish audiences, the allegory was impossible to miss. The suffocating state apparatus, the manipulation of television, and the transformation of a once trusted voice into a mouthpiece reflected their daily reality. Censors allowed the film, perhaps blinded by its sci-fi trappings, but its critique was razor-sharp. Zulkin used grotesque imagery, faceless police, surreal broadcasts, and oppressive bureaucrats to expose how truth could be annihilated with a smile and a slogan. Behind the scenes, production was fraught with tension. The looming political crisis meant everyone involved feared the project might be shelved. Yet Zulkin pressed forward, insisting that science fiction was the safest way to reveal truths others dared not say aloud. Reception was mixed. Officials dismissed it, ordinary viewers whispered its meaning, and critics abroad hailed it as one of the boldest works of Eastern Bloc cinema. Today, it stands as a chilling reminder that dystopia doesn't always wear alien faces. Sometimes, it looks like the evening news. Cesta do Praveku, Journey to the Beginning of Time, 1955. At first, Karel Zeman's Cesta do Praveku seemed innocent. A children's adventure film, an imaginative journey through prehistoric Earth. 4 boys set out on a riverboat and find themselves drifting backward through time, from the Ice Age to the dawn of dinosaurs. It was whimsical, enchanting, and yet, beneath its charm, it carried a quiet defiance. Why? Because at the height of Cold War suspicion, Zeman dared to make a film about discovery, exploration, and wonder without ideology. In an era where every narrative was expected to promote socialist ideals, Journey to the Beginning of Time was refreshingly apolitical. Instead, it celebrated curiosity itself, and that, paradoxically, made it dangerous. Censors were uncertain. Was it harmless entertainment for children, or did it encourage thinking outside the rigid lines of doctrine? Zeman's dazzling mix of live action and animation gave it an otherworldly feel, unlike anything else produced in the Eastern Bloc. Officials worried it looked too Western, too fanciful, but its popularity was undeniable. Families flocked to see it, mesmerized by its dinosaurs and time-bending journey. Behind the scenes, Zeman's studio faced immense challenges. With no access to Hollywood budgets, they relied on ingenuity. Stop-motion, miniatures, hand-painted backdrops, every trick of early cinema was deployed. The result was so convincing that American distributors bought the film, albeit with edits and a new narration to suit their markets. In Czechoslovakia, it became beloved, a rare moment of cinematic joy in an otherwise tense era. In the West, it was recut and misunderstood, treated as a curiosity rather than the pioneering visual marvel it was. Today, Journey to the Beginning of Time is hailed as a masterpiece of visual imagination. Its charm endures not because of propaganda, but because of its universal appeal, the hunger to explore, to question, to dream. Its final reflection? Even in an age of fear, one film dared to remind us that curiosity itself was revolutionary. OB, Oba, The End of Civilization, 1985. Few films captured the existential despair of the Cold War as hauntingly as Piotr Sulkin's Oba, The End of Civilization. Set in a decaying bunker after an unspecified apocalypse, it presents a society clinging to a lie, the promise of a mythical ark that will one day rescue the survivors. The population, starving and desperate, survives on faith manufactured by officials who know the ark doesn't exist. The film's protagonist, Soft, works as a bureaucrat tasked with maintaining this illusion. His job isn't to save humanity, but to manage its despair. Every hallway, every collapsing wall of the bunker drips with metaphor. Poland itself, crumbling under pressure, kept alive by promises that no one truly believed. Sulkin's vision was raw, bleak, and unnervingly close to reality. Censors tolerated it only because its dystopian setting seemed distant enough from the present. Yet audiences understood. The imagery, cracked domes, suffocating crowds, leaders spouting false reassurances mirrored their own world. It wasn't the future. It was today, dressed in sci-fi disguise. Production was grueling, with sets deliberately built to look unstable and oppressive. Actors recalled working in freezing conditions, wearing ragged costumes that weren't far from the shortages in real life. But the result was unforgettable. Upon release, many found it too grim, yet others hailed it as genius, a film that stripped hope bare. Today, Oba endures as one of Eastern Europe's great apocalyptic visions, a reminder that the most destructive weapon is not the bomb, but the lie that sustains despair. The Silent Star, Der Schweigende Stern, divided by Milczonka Gwiazda, 1960. Though technically a Polish-East German co-production, The Silent Star carried strong Polish roots and influence. Based on Stanisław Lem's novel, The Astronauts, it told the story of an international crew discovering a deadly message from Venus, a planet that once prepared to destroy Earth but annihilated itself in nuclear war. At release, it was hailed as a cinematic triumph. The special effects, though modest, captivated audiences behind the Iron Curtain. An internationalist crew, Russians, Poles, Africans, Asians, worked together to save humanity, a vision of socialist solidarity projected into the stars. But beneath the utopia, darker currents flowed. In Poland, viewers whispered that Venus's fate was a thinly veiled allegory for their own world. A society consumed by secrecy, arrogance, and weapons of mass destruction. Wasn't that the story of the Cold War itself? Censors approved the film, but Lem himself was furious. He hated the adaptation, calling it crude and simplistic, its moralism forced. He argued that the party had hijacked his story, turning his ambiguity into propaganda. Behind the scenes, there was turmoil. East German studios demanded a heroic tone. Polish consultants argued for subtlety. Rumors swirled of arguments between Lem and producers, with the author ultimately disowning the film. Actors, meanwhile, struggled with the weight of expectation. They were performing not just a story, but a message meant to project Eastern Bloc unity to the world. When it premiered abroad, Western critics sneered. It was dismissed as clumsy, preachy, too heavy-handed. Yet, over time, it gained cult status, appreciated for its strange atmosphere and its haunting vision of a world destroyed by its own hubris. Today, The Silent Star remains a fascinating Cold War artifact, a film that tried to warn humanity, even as it was bent into the shape demanded by ideology. Its reflective message, the dead planet of Venus, still whispers across decades. Beware the arrogance of power, for even the brightest utopias can reduce themselves to ash. Tetsuo, The Iron Man, 1989. Few films can truly be called an assault on the senses, but Tetsuo, The Iron Man, earns that title with every screech of metal and every frame of its industrial nightmare. Directed by Shinya Tsukamoto and released in 1989, this black-and-white cyberpunk fever dream turned low-budget filmmaking into an art form. It's messy, it's frantic, and it's unforgettable. The story begins with a man who, after a bizarre encounter, slowly transforms into a being made of twisted iron and steel. Bolts erupt from his skin, wires snake from his body, and everyday reality collapses into a grotesque symphony of machinery. Instead of sleek robots or futuristic cities, Tsukamoto gives us claustrophobic apartments, grimy alleyways, and a Tokyo that feels alive with mechanical infection. What makes Tetsuo so powerful isn't just the body horror imagery, but the relentless energy of its editing and sound. Scenes cut like machine pistons, fast, jarring, impossible to look away from. The soundtrack, a pounding industrial score, feels like metal grinding against metal, keeping your pulse racing as the protagonist loses his humanity. For Western audiences, Tetsuo was unlike anything they had seen. It wasn't polished like Blade Runner or epic like Star Wars. Instead, it was raw underground cinema, a punk statement against conformity and the dehumanizing effects of technology. Critics often compared it to David Lynch's Eraserhead or David Cronenberg's early work, but Tetsuo carved its own identity, unapologetically Japanese in its style and themes. The film spawned sequels and influenced an entire wave of cyberpunk art, inspiring everyone from filmmakers to musicians. Without it, the gritty, biomechanical aesthetic that became a hallmark of Japanese underground cinema might never have taken root. Watching it today, Tetsuo, the Iron Man still feels dangerous, like you're plugging into a power line of pure cinematic chaos. It's not for the faint of heart, but for sci-fi fans who crave something truly different. It's a masterpiece hiding in plain sight. From astronauts lost in cosmic despair to children drifting into prehistoric wonder, these Czechoslovak and Polish films dared to dream under watchful eyes. Some survived. Others were mutilated. A few vanished completely. Yet all remind us, art in chains still speaks of freedom. Which of these forgotten treasures stunned you most? Like, subscribe, and comment, because the past still has galaxies to reveal.